Thank you all. My name is Claire Barrett, and I'm Director at APIs First and a founding member of the API Collective. And shout out to Mariuka Dinioha and Audrey Kolsky in particular, who've helped me in the preparation of this, which is a commentary on where we see API, the role of the API product manager emerging and evolving at the moment. My key points for today are it's a discipline that is changing and evolving very quickly. It's still relatively new in the world of tech, or even in the world of, certainly in financial services and businesses. It's underpinning strategies, and at the moment, it's many different shapes and sizes. They're not actually a standard for what it looks like. So let's go back and start with a bit of a history lesson. I've spent quite a lot of my life in Australia. Both professional life, hence you can probably see a bit of my accent. Australians obviously well known for their very diverse wildlife, and I always think of the genealogy of, there's reptiles and mammals in the sort of geological tree. There's all come down from the dinosaurs. There are birds, and then there's out on the side the marsupials, and then on the very end there's the monotremes. There's only two. There's a platypus and an echidna. And I sometimes ask myself why, when I'm talking with people, API product managers, those of you in the room and others, do I feel, they seem to explain to me that they feel a little bit like they're kind of on that edge. But their evolution and their connection is actually to a lot of other disciplines. It goes back all the way to the 1930s. I used some research here from Martin Ericsson. Back in the 1930s, the companies like initially Procter & Gamble and then later Hewlett-Packard became and got really good at defining what product was. And they led a lot of the industry that we now think of as marketing standards around product and brand. After the war, organizations like Toyota in Japan and other manufacturers started developing processes that were getting rid of waste, that were focused on features that were lean and mean, if you like. The engineering construction industries were starting to get good after the war, 50s, 60s, at projects. They were building disciplines around project management. And organizations more in the services space, I've worked a lot in financial services, hence some service history, started getting really good at automating and processing. Now, that process automation, those of us in the IT industry, those who remember back to the days of ERPs and digitization, that was all becoming more and more prevalent during 80s, 90s, and noughties. But it was really at the start of this century that the technology industry in its own right started accelerating very, very quickly the use and the combination of a number of these methodologies and ways of working. So the big techs, you all know the stories, but they looked at, so there were a number of people out of Hewlett-Packard who, and other colleagues of theirs and friends in Silicon Valley, end of the last century, start of this, that started saying there's ways that we could be doing more around using technology to create different new experiences. We can learn from some of these. Our practices of delivering tech are very slow. We can learn from some of these lean processes. And a group of people came up with the Agile Manifesto. That then merged with a lot of this customer data stuff that was coming from FMCG branding, started framing the disciplines or the thought leadership that we think around platforms and ecosystems. In the services world, we had a lot of digitization going on. Now, these arguably have all kind of combined from this idea of product. So if you talk to people who have been in the industry or been in the workplace in tech since the start of this century, put your hands up if you're prepared to admit it's not me, I admit, you will tend to think of product as a very different definition idea about what product is. You come from tech industry and you talk about product all the time. That typically is the people up at the top of that side. In a lot of the organizations that we talk to, more mature businesses, when they talk about product, they actually are talking about some of this space because they're using things like scaled agile practices and they're leveraging, wanting to get all these benefits. In summary, API products are at the end of this. I don't think they're the platypus, by the way, but I think that there is a lot of confusion that we see in the market about understanding what a product is, an API product, and therefore there's a very different view about what API product management might be. Why do we need them? If you believe that API product success translates into business success, an argument about whether that's true or false, I basically suggest that, and one of the things that we talk about often, there's a business or an organization, an enterprise, a public sector organization view of what it wants to do. If it's a tech industry, it's got a product strategy. They may have APIs as products, which will rely on some good discipline and product management. So you can argue there is a connection. I always believe it's sometimes not just a direct, it can be indirect. If you are a large, let's say, financial services organization, you may have a tech or an API strategy that is informed by the organization's broader business goals and purpose, and it's enabled by products, etc. So whether you are embedding APIs and consuming them from other third parties into your business, or whether you are being embedded, API product management, the discipline, will be there somewhere, which would lead one to expect that there are API product managers who help do that. If you believe that API product management is important, you have good company. This is a relatively small piece of research. This goes back 4 years with Gartner. They talked to a number of Canadian CIOs about what were the 4 most in-demand roles that they saw in their community. And API product manager featured as 4th. But the important bit is that gray line. The highest performing companies were the 42% said this is really important. So the organizations that were still probably less aware of the discipline didn't actually see it as nearly as important as cyber, UX, cloud architecture. I believe this has changed. I also believe that the definition that they provided there is interesting, but I think it's a little bit too broad. And looking at what's been happening recently, I would argue that you can actually double down and kind of subdivide this. This is really a superspecies, not the subspecies. The other interesting kind of context for why API product management and the discipline are important is its link, the need for you to be able, for API product managers to be able to understand the data, the systems, the processes of other industries that they are working with. So we often find with our clients that the places where they are looking to participate in the API economy in new industries means that the people they're working with need to be able to, if they come out of a construction industry, they're then talking to finance people. Well, back to my point about product and their genealogy, they have a different heritage. They use a slightly different language for what's often the same things. And you actually need people who are really good at translating and understanding and applying disciplines, languages, systems, protocols from other industries. So what do we see the API product manager role is evolving to? Is it a purple unicorn, a chameleon wizard? Hopefully not a scary clown. We're going to do, by suggesting it, we're going back a step in the genealogy to the tech products again. And I've plagiarized taken some thinking from Will Lawrence and Sachin Rekhi here, who identified 4 types of tech product manager and looked at, or aligned those to 4 different major types of platforms that we are all familiar with. So, and you can see there's engineering-driven, data-driven, design-driven, sales-driven. And we've asked ourselves, so this, by the way, was the way that they explained those, in summary, those 4 different archetypes, subspecies of product manager, tech product manager. And you can see from, and I'm sure we're all users of all of those. We know many about them, a lot about them. We get a good idea about what those are about. So let's go and apply that to API products. The engineering-driven API product manager is a label. They may not be called that, but it tends to be the one that we often see in large, mature organizations that are undergoing a lot of change. They're looking to insource their capabilities, they're simplifying their tech, and what they are not, however, is they are not, or shouldn't be, in our argument, because this is other people's role, they're not necessarily leading the tech simplification agenda. That's usually an organization-wide thing. They're not championing reuse. They're very much part of it, but they're not necessarily the evangelist for the API initiative. They're probably not also looking after API governance, but clearly they're working with the people who do. So this is still an emerging discipline. The people who are really good at it are focused on this kind of stuff. So they are really worried, they are concerned and interested and motivated by the technical performance of the APIs that they manage as the API products that enable this to happen. The people that they're working with on a day-to-day basis are engineers, architects. They are enthusiastic, and you will find them in places where they are learning and applying new technology. One to perhaps watch for with this community is there may be a bit of a temptation to have too many have a hammer that everything looks like a nail. There are certainly organizations, and it's certainly what we see in the let's say financial services industry, who are looking to build really strong, robust, secure capabilities. This tends to be the API product management subspecies that they're working with. The next three, I'm going to give more examples in the fintech industry. But if you're sitting on the embedder side of the thing, this is actually quite useful to, I think, be able to understand and think about. So chose on Fido as an example of a fintech that presents itself to externally as an API-enabled business that looks like it has a very strong emphasis on data-driven capabilities. And they actually talk about how Revolut embedded their capability, and you can see it's very metric-driven. Not to be confused with, so the API product manager that is helping work with Revolut in that example is not the person necessarily that owns the data product. They're more about ensuring that they're using metrics and data to monitor, analyze, and continuously improve the API performance. They're very much focused on the API activity today. Needless to say, you would expect they're very statistical, analytical, and they communicate with data and evidence. You will find them often building new dashboards. That can sometimes come with a little bit of a red flag because there may be a tendency to perhaps emphasize in that space. The third archetype is the design-driven API product manager. Chose an example here, Atom Finance, as a fintech that presents itself in very much an API product, set of products that are driven around the design experience of the people that are consuming their APIs. So just kind of getting the thinking there going. And a design-driven API product manager is not one to be confused with the person who's incubating embedded business models. We've talked a lot about this. We see those play out as really now the business responsibilities for people that are looking to expand. Monetization, we'll talk about that in a minute. They're also not the people who are creating new API-enabled customer experiences. They are creating the APIs that will support that. You'll find these people, they could be hanging out up in the partner village as we speak. These are people who are looking at the API future for that. So they're all about what new API design endpoints might actually be a requirement. Not re-engineering what we've got, but applying design thinking practices and processes to what people need from their API products. They're often away at user panels, at consumer forums. There is a bit of a risk, there's a red flag on this archetype, subspecies, can be a bit of a tendency to always be thinking of the next thing and maybe not converting that into the full design that you need. Lastly, the fourth subspecies of API product manager is the sales-driven one. Not to be confused with a person that is API-ifying existing products. So taking an insurance product or a banking product and making it into an API is not this. This is about having a this is about commercializing and really deeply understanding and thinking about the success that will come from a monetized API. And we chose Yapily as an example here, at least the way that they present themselves, with a very sort of upfront representation on the pricing and the product. I thought this was interesting. It's only on the 24th of October, but an example of NatWest making yet another move in their embedded finance strategy by partnering with capabilities from organizations like this. And so you've got NatWest talking with, presumably, the API product manager for for their particular products there, or they will be at the moment. So this is a summary of the sales-driven API product manager subspecies. Probably the one that, in many ways, people find the easiest to understand. Key message for us is that, from us, is that that is not all of what API product management is about. I think it's pretty self-explanatory about the things that are important for that group. Oh, I should add, where are you going to find them? Hanging out with their business colleagues, drinking a lot of coffee. No, that's important thing is they're very commercial. So in order to set up an API product manager for success, which is the theme of this presentation, it's very important to ensure that you're not expecting them to deliver on some of these goals if they aren't supported or have access to these sorts of skills. At the end of the day, the success of the discipline of API product management is going to rely on the success of the people. And it is a very new, still, I believe, an evolving discipline. It seems to be changing by the day, by the year. But in summary, if you get it right, it will actually enable and power the API goals that you have for the organization, but be quite realistic about how to set the person, the people, the team around that for success. And this is hopefully a framework that you could use to apply that. If you'd like to know more, I would love to get your feedback. To be honest, the community input to this kind of thinking is really important. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can contact us at APIs First or at the apicollective.com. And I'll be here for the rest of today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Claire. That's very, very interesting. I think I, like many others, probably had we all know the first category, but thinking about the other categories has given me a lot to think about, particularly as I sell solutions to product.
You're right in that space, aren't you?
Exactly. So, please, any questions for Claire?
I'm going to step forward because I can actually see you then. You may not all realize this, but would you like to give them?
I can't speak without the mic. I'll just run. Don't drop it. That's the only will drive you.
Everyone else can hear you. I'm sure your question's very important. What's your name?
My name is Rohit.
Hi, Rohit.
Love to become a product manager, but there's this one thing I really have a challenge with. It's ageism. Like in tech, we know it's not about the years of experience, but the skills you have. But how do you navigate the situation when you're young, but you have experience, you know the skills? So how do you navigate from a technical job, as a software engineer, and how do you navigate into becoming a product manager? What's the bridge like?
What a fantastic question. Thank you, Rohit. I might even go back to this. Do you mind if I go back to the tree? Sorry, I'll have to do it this way. Nope, maybe it's, perhaps they've disabled it. That genealogy that I talked about from the world of product, the top half of that picture, so everything, I said like technology comes in at about the year 2000. Jeff Bezos' mandate, which if you haven't looked it up, those of you in the API world, go and look it up. It's at 2002 that was published. So who came into the workforce on or after 2002? We've got several of you, but a small number. The rest of us, we are in the bottom half of that. Like our experiences, they may, if we've worked in the tech industry, they may be in the top, but it's much more likely that the way that we work and the things that we think of and the things that we understand and the way that we go about framing stuff is from a different heritage. So I personally believe it's incredibly important that one engages a fully diverse community of people to have this body. And I think that bias does exist. They talk about age bias. There's another bias, by the way, if you're over a certain age. We could also talk about it. But I think it's really important. I hope that some people will go and talk to you in the break and talk about how you can get into this role. And for those of you that are looking at hiring and building talent and capability, these people with the new world who've grown up in this tech, they just get it. And it's so important that we listen to them and bring them on board. And they can learn from us too, hopefully.